What is the greatest evil you can do to a country? Making it dependent on your help. For us, Trump's sudden decision to cut American aid was the beginning of liberation, not disaster. Today, we are building an agricultural model of our own and declaring Africa's food independence. President Ibrahim Traoré's words echoed through the packed conference hall in Ouagadougou. The announcement had come just days after Donald Trump newly returned to the White House for his second term in January. 2025 had signed Executive Order 14,092, freezing all U.S. foreign aid programs worldwide. The Western media predicted catastrophe for aid-dependent nations. Yet here was Traoré, declaring not disaster but liberation. On the morning of January 23, 2025, just 3 days after his inauguration, President Trump posted on his Truth Social platform, "The billions we spend on foreign aid is totally unexplainable. Countries receiving our money hate us. This ends now." Hours later, he signed the executive order that would send shockwaves through the global development community. The United States Agency for International Development, USAID, with its 10,000 employees and operations in over 60 countries, was thrown into chaos. Projects were frozen, staff laid off, and decades-long programs abruptly suspended. The $68 billion annual U.S. international aid budget, representing nearly 40% of all global development assistance, vanished overnight. For Burkina Faso, which had received approximately $320 million annually in U.S. assistance, primarily for food security programs, healthcare initiatives, and military cooperation, the impact should have been devastating. International aid organizations predicted famine within months. Emergency meetings were called at the United Nations. European donors scrambled to fill the gap, but their own budgets were already stretched thin. Yet, President Traoré's response defied all expectations. Instead of pleading for alternative funding or declaring a state of emergency, he called a national address that would become known as the Liberation Speech. For too long, we have measured our worth by how much aid we receive rather than how much we produce. He told the nation, foreign aid has not developed our country. It has developed our dependency. Today, this dependency has been broken for us. Now, we must ensure it is never rebuilt. The speech resonated deeply with many Burkinab who had long harbored ambivalence about foreign assistance despite their country's poverty. Memories of Thomas Sankara, a revolutionary leader who had championed self-reliance in the 1980s before his assassination, were still vivid. Traoré explicitly invoked Sankara's vision. The hand that feeds you controls you. We will now feed ourselves within 48 hours of Trump's announcement. Traoré convened an emergency cabinet meeting that lasted through the night. But unlike emergency sessions in other affected countries, which focused on securing replacement funding from other donors, Burkina Faso's leadership took a radically different approach. The meeting produced the Burkinab Sovereign Development Plan. It's a comprehensive strategy not to replace foreign aid, but to transcend it. The plan targeted 5 critical sectors where dependency had been most acute: food production, healthcare, education, energy, and water. For each sector, the plan outlined concrete steps towards self-sufficiency. Dr. Aminata Yuro, Minister of Agriculture, describes the atmosphere of that meeting. There was a strange energy in the room, part fear, part exhilaration. We knew this could be catastrophic, but there was also a sense that the crutch we had been leaning on for decades had been taken away, forcing us to stand on our own feet. The plan's most immediate and ambitious component addressed food security. USAID had been providing approximately $85 million annually in food assistance to Burkina Faso, including emergency food aid and agricultural development programs. This aid, while feeding vulnerable populations, had also created market distortions that undermined local farmers. When food aid arrives, prices collapse, explains Ibrahim Traoré, a sorghum farmer from the Center-North region. I cannot compete with free grain. So each year I plant less, become poorer, and then need aid myself. It is a cycle that keeps us dependent. The new plan called for a radical transformation of the agricultural sector. All arable government land, approximately 150,000 hectares, would be immediately made available to farming cooperatives. Tax incentives would be offered for private investment in irrigation, storage, and processing facilities. Most controversially, the government would guarantee minimum prices for staple crops, effectively creating a price floor that protected farmers from market volatility. Critics, particularly from international financial institutions, warned that such interventionist policies would distort markets and prove fiscally unsustainable. The IMF issued a statement expressing grave concerns about Burkina Faso's protectionist agricultural policies, warning they could further isolate the country from global markets. Traoré's response was defiant. "We have followed your free market prescriptions for decades, and our people remain hungry. Perhaps it is time to write our own economic rules." The agricultural reforms were accompanied by an unprecedented mobilization of national resources. Civil servants were required to devote 1 day per month to agricultural work. The military, which had traditionally been deployed primarily for security operations, was tasked with constructing irrigation systems and farm-to-market roads. University students were encouraged to spend vacations supporting agricultural initiatives in exchange for tuition credits. This mass mobilization was reminiscent of Sankora's Commitment Sundays in the 1980s, when citizens collectively built schools, clinics, and other infrastructure. The difference was the scale and the focus. The entire nation was being reoriented toward food production. In the health sector, the challenges were equally daunting. U.S. assistance had funded approximately 40% of Burkina Faso's HIV/AIDS programs, 30% of its malaria prevention efforts, and numerous maternal and child health initiatives. The immediate concern was maintaining access to essential medications and preventing the collapse of rural health services. Dr. Salif Kabir, Director of Public Health, acknowledges the initial panic. "We had stockpiles of critical medications for perhaps 3 months. After that, we faced potential public health disasters. We needed to completely rethink our health system in a matter of weeks." The solution came from an unexpected quarter. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger announced the formation of a joint pharmaceutical production initiative, pooling resources to manufacture generic versions of essential medications. This move, while legally complex under international patent law, was justified under emergency provisions, allowing least developed countries to produce life-saving medications. Within 6 months, a pharmaceutical factory on the outskirts of Ouagadougou began producing anti-malarial medications, antibiotics, and pain relievers. The quality was initially variable and production volumes inadequate to meet all needs, but it represented a first step toward pharmaceutical sovereignty. "We are not yet producing at the scale or complexity we need," admits Dr. Cabaret, "but every pill we manufacture ourselves is one. We don't need to beg for or purchase at exploitative prices from multinational corporations." The education sector faced similar disruptions. USAID had funded school feeding programs, teacher training initiatives, and infrastructure development. With this funding gone, the government turned to local solutions. Schools were granted land for agricultural production, with students and teachers working together to grow food for school meals. This not only addressed nutritional needs, but integrated practical agricultural education into the curriculum. Community contributions, both financial and INAND, replaced foreign funding for school construction and maintenance. Fatimata Dio, a school principal in Bobo de Alasso, describes the transformation. "Before we waited for NOSs to build our classrooms or provide books. Now parents contribute what they can. One father is a mason and helps with repairs. Another mother makes school uniforms. We grow our own food for lunch programs. It is harder in many ways, but there is a pride that was missing before. Energy. Independence presented perhaps the greatest technical challenge. Burkina Faso's electricity generation capacity was inadequate, with only 20% of the population having reliable access to electricity. The national grid was dependent on imported fossil fuels, draining scarce foreign exchange reserves. Here, necessity catalyzed innovation. The government redirected military and security budgets toward a massive distributed solar energy program. Rather than focusing on expanding the centralized grid, they deployed thousands of community-scale solar microgrids. Local technicians were rapidly trained to install and maintain these systems, creating employment while building energy resilience. We leapfrogged the centralized grid model, explains Energy Minister Uwisis Mann. Compare. Each village becoming energy self-sufficient is more resilient than depending on a national grid that can fail or be attacked. Sometimes having fewer resources forces more creative solutions. Water security initiatives followed a similar decentralized approach. The ultra-deep wells project already underway before the aid cuts was dramatically expanded. These wells, some reaching depths of over 800 meters, tap into ancient aquifers that provide reliable water even during drought periods, combined with community-managed water conservation systems. They form the backbone of a new water security strategy. The most remarkable aspect of Burkina Faso's response to the aid cuts was not any single initiative, but the psychological transformation that accompanied them. For decades, the national self-image had been shaped by dependency. Government officials measured success by how much foreign assistance they secured. Communities evaluated their status by which international NOSs operated in their area. The aid apparatus had become so embedded in the national psyche that imagining development without it seemed impossible. When aid stops, something unexpected happens, reflects sociologist Dr. Ibrahim Traoré. No relation to the president. There is first panic, then adaptation, and finally, a kind of collective realization. We can solve our own problems. This psychological liberation may ultimately be more valuable than any project or program. This shift in mindset became evident in communities across the country. In the northern town of Gibo, which had previously hosted 5 international NOSs implementing various water, health, and education projects, residents initially feared abandonment. When the NOSs departed, following the aid cuts, local leaders formed a community development committee that mobilized resources from within. We realized how much we had been waiting for solutions from outside, says committee chairman Adamo. Now we ask, what can we do with what we have? It is more difficult, but also more dignified. This psychological transformation extended to the relationship with international institutions. Before the aid cuts, government officials approached the World Bank, IMF, and other donors as supplicants, carefully aligning policies with donor priorities to ensure continued funding. After the cuts, a new dynamic emerged. When IMF representatives visited Ouagadougou in July 2025 to discuss a potential emergency financing package, they found the government's posture markedly changed. Rather than eagerly accepting whatever terms were offered, Burkinabe officials negotiated firmly, rejecting conditions they deemed contrary to their sovereign development plan. They seemed almost surprised that we had our own vision and were not simply desperate for their money, recalls Finance Minister Isu Nakima. It was as if they expected us to be on our knees without American aid. Instead, they found us standing tall with our own plan. The IMF ultimately approved a modest financing package with significantly fewer conditions than previous arrangements. This new relationship, characterized by greater equality and respect for sovereignty, represented a fundamental shift in Burkina Faso's engagement with international financial institutions. 6 months after Trump's executive order, the first data on its impact began to emerge. Contrary to catastrophic predictions, food production in Burkina Faso had increased by 18%. The guaranteed minimum price policy had incentivized farmers to expand production while the mass mobilization for agricultural work had brought thousands of hectares of previously unutilized land into cultivation. Public health indicators, however, showed more mixed results. Some preventive programs, particularly for malaria and maternal health, had been disrupted. The net pharmaceutical production was not yet meeting all needs. Here, the government acknowledged shortcomings while emphasizing the path toward future self-sufficiency. We are not claiming that the transition has been painless. President Traoré stated in a 6-month assessment, "Some services have been reduced. Some citizens have suffered, but we are building systems that will serve us better in the long term than perpetual dependency." The economic data revealed other surprising trends. While GDP growth had slowed from 5.2% to 3.8%, domestic resource mobilization had increased dramatically. Tax collection improved by 35%, partly due to new regulations and partly due to greater compliance motivated by national solidarity. The domestic financing of development, while still insufficient for all needs, was growing at an unprecedented rate, perhaps most significantly. The informal economy, which represents approximately 70% of economic activity in Burkina Faso, showed signs of formalization and growth. Small enterprises that had previously operated in the shadows of the aid-dominated economy found new opportunities in providing goods and services previously supplied by international organizations. Mayamo, who started a small business producing reusable sanitary pads after a USA-funded women's health program ended, exemplifies this trend. Before, these products were given for free by the American program. When they left, women still needed them. I saw an opportunity to make them locally, using materials we have here and selling them at prices people can afford. Thousands of such micro-entrepreneurs emerged, filling gaps left by departed aid programs while creating sustainable local businesses. This organic economic ecosystem, while not captured in official statistics, represented a form of resilience that had been suppressed by aid dependency. The international reaction to Burkina Faso's approach evolved over time. Initial skepticism and predictions of failure gradually gave way to cautious interest. Development economists, long divided over the efficacy of foreign aid, watched closely as this unplanned experiment in aid withdrawal unfolded. Some saw vindication for long-standing critiques of aid dependency. Economist Dr. James Ferguson, who has written extensively on the unintended consequences of development assistance, noted, "What we're seeing in Burkina Faso is consistent with research suggesting that aid can undermine local institutions and initiative. When aid is suddenly removed, there's often an initial shock followed by indigenous innovation that was previously crowded out." Others emphasize the unique circumstances and question the replicability of Burkina Faso's approach. This is a country with strong revolutionary traditions and a leader explicitly invoking Sankora's self-reliance ideology, observed development scholar Dr. Aisha. And on go, not all aid-dependent countries have these historical and leadership resources to draw upon in crisis. What few could deny was that Burkina Faso's response had defied conventional wisdom about aid dependency. The predicted collapse had not materialized. Instead, a more complex picture emerged, one of hardship and adaptation. Setbacks and innovations, losses in some areas, and unexpected gains in others. By the one-year mark, Burkina Faso's approach had attracted attention from other African nations facing similar aid disruptions. Delegations from Mali, Niger, Tanzania, and Zambia visited to study the Burkinabe model. While not all elements were transferable to different contexts, the psychological stance, treating aid cuts as an opportunity for sovereignty rather than a disaster, resonated widely. Regional integration accelerated as a direct response to individual, national vulnerability. Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger deepened their cooperation through the alliance of Sahel states, creating common agricultural policies, shared healthcare resources, and integrated energy systems. What began as a crisis response evolved into a new model of regional self-reliance. The aid cuts forced us to look to our neighbors rather than to distant capitals, explains Foreign Minister Gibel Bosel. We discovered that collectively we have many of the resources and capabilities we thought we lacked individually. This regional approach proved particularly effective in addressing security challenges the Sahel region had long struggled with. Extremist groups with American military aid playing a significant role in counter-terrorism efforts. When this support was cut, regional security cooperation intensified out of necessity. Previously, each country's security forces were oriented toward pleasing their American advisors and securing continued funding. Notes security analyst Colonel Umaru, SAWADO. Now we focus on practical cooperation with our neighbors who share our security concerns. It is less about sophisticated equipment and more about coordination and local knowledge. The societal impacts extended beyond economics and security. Cultural confidence flourished as imported development models gave way to locally designed solutions. Traditional knowledge, particularly in agriculture and medicine, gained new respect as communities sought alternatives to previously imported approaches. At the University of Ouagadougou, curricula shifted away from uncritically adopting Western development theories toward analyzing and building upon indigenous knowledge systems. Research priorities realigned toward practical challenges facing the country rather than topics favored by international funders. We are decolonizing knowledge itself, asserts Dr. Aminata Traoré, head of the university's newly established Center for Sovereign Development Studies. For generations, we learned that solutions come from elsewhere and that our traditional practices are backward. Now we study our own agricultural systems, our own medical knowledge, our own governance traditions, not with romanticism, but with critical appreciation for their value. This intellectual sovereignty complemented the material changes underway. The synthesis of traditional wisdom with contemporary challenges produced innovations uniquely suited to local conditions. In agriculture, for instance, farmers combined modern water management techniques with traditional crop varieties that had been marginalized during the Green Revolution, but proved more resilient to local climate conditions. As the second year of the post-aid era began, the narrative around Burkina Faso's experience continued to evolve. International media, which had initially focused on humanitarian concerns and predicted disaster, began reporting on the unexpected, resilience and innovation emerging from the situation. National Geographic published a feature titled Burkina Faso's Self-Reliance, Renaissance, documenting the agricultural transformation. The Economist, initially skeptical, ran an analysis, headlined "The Upside of Abandonment Lessons from Burkina Faso." Even the Wall Street Journal acknowledged the surprising economic adaptation following aid withdrawal. This shifting narrative frustrated some in the international development community who saw it as potentially undermining support for aid budgets. There's a danger in romanticizing what remains a challenging transition, warned the director of a major international NGO. Many vulnerable people have lost vital services. Self-reliance sounds noble, but has real human costs. President Traoré acknowledged these costs while maintaining his commitment to the sovereign development path. We do not claim this transition as painless or perfect. We face many challenges and have made mistakes, but we are writing our own story now, learning our own lessons and building systems that will truly serve our people in the long term. The most profound change was perhaps the most difficult to measure: the relationship between citizens and the state. For decades, many government services had been effectively outsourced to international, NOS, and aid agencies, Citizens often look to these organizations rather than their own government for basic needs and accountability. As foreign organizations departed, the government was forced to fill gaps and respond directly to citizen demands. This created both challenges and opportunities for governance. On one hand, resource constraints meant some services deteriorated. On the other, a more direct relationship between the state and citizens began to emerge with greater accountability and responsiveness. Before, if a clinic lacked medicines, people complained to the NGO running it, notes political scientist Dr. Omar Tapsoba. The NGO blamed funding shortfalls from its international donors. Nobody held the government accountable. Now, citizens demand services directly from their government, strengthening democratic accountability. Local governance particularly flourished in this new environment. Village and municipal councils, previously sidelined by well-funded international projects, became central to community development efforts. Traditional leadership structures, often ignored or undermined by external actors, regained relevance in mobilizing community resources and mediating conflicts. 2 years after Trump's executive order, Burkina Faso hosted the African Sovereign Development Conference, bringing together leaders, scholars, and civil society representatives from across the continent to discuss pathways beyond aid dependency. What had begun as a crisis response had evolved into a continental conversation about development alternatives. In his opening address to the conference, President Traoré reflected on the journey. When foreign aid was cut, many predicted our collapse. They saw us only as recipients, never as creators. They measured our worth by our neediness, not our capabilities. We have proven them wrong, not because we do not face challenges, but because we are meeting those challenges with dignity, creativity, and sovereignty. The Ouagadougou Declaration emerging from the conference articulated principles for development based on self-reliance, regional integration, and psychological liberation from dependency. It called not for the rejection of all external partnerships, but for such partnerships to be entered on equal terms, respecting African sovereignty and knowledge. As the third year of this unplanned experiment approaches, the full assessment of its impacts remains complex and contested. Material conditions have improved in some areas and deteriorated in others. Certain vulnerable populations have undoubtedly suffered from the loss of targeted assistance. Yet new forms of resilience, innovation, and sovereignty have emerged that were difficult to imagine under the previous aid paradigm. What is clear is that the narrative of inevitability surrounding foreign aid has been fundamentally disrupted. The assumption that certain countries cannot develop without extensive external assistance has been challenged by lived experience. A space for imagining alternative development pathways has opened for Ibrahim Traoré and the citizens of Burkina Faso. This psychological liberation may ultimately prove more significant than any specific policy or program. The country that was once defined by its dependency is redefining itself through self-reliance, not as an ideological position, but as a practical response to changing global realities. As Traoré often concludes his speeches on this topic, when they cut the rope we had been climbing, we feared falling. Instead, we discovered we had wings. Music.